Hello once again, Union County. We are in our continuing series on covering virtually, if you will, the Union County Heritage Festival, since it cannot physically be held this year due to concerns surrounding the COVID virus. So for this segment, we have with us Miss Ellen Perry. And to start out with, Miss Ellen may not be as well known to some of you as the first segment that we did, Miss Wanda Byerly, although you are related to Miss Wanda, aren't you?
I'm not related to her, but my husband is, so that makes me related to her.
Okay.
They're cousins.
You're related by default.
They're cousins.
Okay. And, but she will tell you how she got to Union County, and then we'll talk a little bit about some quilting. So, Miss Ellen, take it away.
I'm from Houston County, Alabama. My husband had grandparents in Alabama, and he had grandparents in Sharps Chapel. His father was in Fort Rooker, Alabama, and then he went to the World War II. And he married my husband's mother, and my husband was born in the South, and further south than we are here. And he lived in Union County until he was 17 years old and moved back to Alabama, and that's where we met. And after our children were older, he wanted to come back to Tennessee and to Union County. So we moved here, and I've been here for 33 years this next month.
33 years?
33 years.
I have seen you over the years many times, never really had the opportunity to make your acquaintance, but your face is very familiar to me.
Well, I've worked with the Heritage Festival
Yes.
since the Heritage Festival began. I volunteered at the museum ever since the museum opened, and I worked with Miss Wanda up there for all the years that she's been there. When we started the Heritage Festival 15 years ago, this would have been our 16th year, I started doing the quilt show. And that was something that I really loved, was the quilting, because that was part of my heritage, even though that was in South Alabama. People made quilts and canned and did all of the things that they were talking about here, and it was very similar to what is here, because we were a rural area, in a rural county, and a lot of farming. Where they grew tobacco here, we had peanuts and cotton and other vegetables, but it was very similar, the culture was. And my mother made this quilt along with an aunt of mine, Aunt Mamie. She was actually my great aunt. She was my mother's aunt, and she was married in the early 1900s. Her first husband died from a disease. Her second husband died from a disease not long after that, because they had a lot of flu, typhoid, and that type of illnesses. So she was a widow woman. So Aunt Mamie made quilts for people to earn a living for her children. She made quilts for $1 and later on $2 each. That was a lot of money at the time compared to what it is today, but that was a lot of work.
How would you say this particular quilt is?
This one was probably made, I would say it was made in the late 50s, because this one is not really that old. My mother, actually, she pieced this one and another one just like it on the sewing machine. Then her and Aunt Mamie, who would come and stay with us when she was older, she'd stay with us for weeks or maybe a month at the time, and they would put quilting frames up in an extra room that we had. Either they would put them from the ceiling and do the quilts that way, or sometimes my grandmother had what they called quilting horses. They were like sawhorses are. And they would put the quilts on there and then, roll them up and out as they worked on them, which was probably easier than doing them from the ceiling frames. And this one was well used. Me and my sister used it on our bed for quite a few years.
And it's still, just to look at it, as serviceable today as it was the day it was finished, I'm sure.
Yes. And this piece right here is something else. It's not really a quilt, but it is a bedspread. And it's like a chenille spread. My grandmother made this one, and it's actually feed sacks. They did a lot of that, and put them together, and she used yarn, and it's almost like a chenille bedspread is, and you can barely tell where it's put together, but it's very old and in very, bad condition, but
From what I can see of it, looks really good
it's really,
condition.
it's really pretty. She made this one, and then she made one that had a basket design, and I got one, and my sister got one.
Now, how old would you say this is?
Oh, it was probably made in maybe the early 50s or late 40s. It's not really that old, but it's...
Although, in a way, it doesn't sound that old, the 50s, but I wasn't born in the 50s, so
Okay.
they're older than me. That's the interesting thing about a lot of these quilts and antiques that we have. It creeps up on us, the age of it, But what amazes me is even when you go back to the time of Ronald Reagan, lots of the people I know and deal with, especially students in schools, they only know Ronald Reagan like I know John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy was assassinated before I was born, and Ronald Reagan was president before they were born, so it's amazing how time gets away.
It does. And when I was in the 5th grade, we started doing a lot of 4-H club work, and that's when I first made biscuit. We had a biscuit contest at the extension office at our county. It was actually at the county courthouse. I think that's the way it is up here probably today. Or not today, I think they've got a new office now, haven't they?
I think so.
Anyway,
yeah.
we went, I had a friend at school, and we practiced making the biscuit, and we went to the contest and made the biscuit in front of everybody. Of course, we didn't bake them, so I had went to her house before we went, and her mother, I think, actually made the biscuit for us that night because ours didn't turn out real well. But my mother made biscuit for my daddy, I think, every day. He had biscuit at breakfast, biscuit at dinner, through the day, and anytime he eat. And she used a clabber bowl that had belonged to her grandmother, and I still got the clabber bowl today. But she put the flour in there, and then she would dig a little well in it and pour the milk in it. She used plain sweet milk, as we called it, not buttermilk. And then she'd put some cooking oil in there and then mix it up with a fork. She didn't use her hands. And then she patted them out with her hands on a baking sheet and baked them. And that's the way most people made biscuit. Well, when me and my sister started making biscuit, we started doing the modern way where you take a shortening and you cut it in with a pastry cutter, and it makes more flaky biscuits than those were. And today I just use butter in my biscuits when I make biscuit. I don't use shortening. Just found out that butter is not going to harm you. They think butter is better for you than margarine is.
Today it won't harm you. Tomorrow it might kill you, but today it's okay.
We came up one year on our vacation to James's cousin's house, and his wife was making biscuit, and she had a bowl, and she put the flour in like Mother did, and then she poured some milk in there, and she reached over where she was frying her sausage, and she took that sausage grease out and put it in the biscuit and stirred it and made them. And they made some of the best biscuit I think I've ever eaten.
That was delicious.
They were very good. I couldn't believe that worked.
Now you have started my little memory on biscuits and cornbread. I'll tell you my story.
Okay.
I was a 4-H club member a year or two here and there, They had, public speaking was about the only thing I could do much in. I always got a red ribbon. Never got a blue, I always got a red. My speech was always on Abraham Lincoln. It was the same one every year. That's probably why I always got a red ribbon. But I did enter the 4-H bread baking contest in the 6th grade.
Okay.
And I decided I'd bake cornbread. And my mother helped me, but I did all the stuff. And whereas hers had always turned out so pretty, mine looked like an old wrinkled man's face on the top. It just kind of collapsed, and I didn't know what I did wrong. I was kind of ashamed of it. But I entered it anyway. I got a green participation ribbon on that one.
Oh, okay.
And during the day, I sat on the row next to the water fountain, and there was a table under the bulletin board. And Scott Brewer all day long, a classmate of mine, he would get up and he would go to the water fountain, and on the way he would take cornbread. By the end of the day, he had eaten my whole pan of cornbread. And he said, I don't know why you didn't win. He said, in my book, you're tops. He enjoyed my pan of cornbread.
Well, that was good. That made you feel good.
Yeah, and his only pan of bread I ever baked in my life.
They were talking earlier, Wanda and Marilyn, about the pone bread. Well, they called them hoe cakes where we were from. They would make cornbread on a black cast iron griddle, pancake griddle, or they would make biscuit that way. And you just broke it off, and instead of patting them out and rolling them out into separate biscuit, and they called them hoe cakes.
Now, my dad always, he was a very picky person. He wanted everything done one certain way. So he trained my mother when he married her, how he wanted her to bake his biscuits. And all I can tell you about it is she had this little white, probably Tupperware bowl that she mixed the dough up in with a big spoon. And then she would ladle it out in a skillet. And it would have like 6 outside and 1 in the middle. He wanted it almost white on the top, not brown. And on the sides and the bottom of the skillet, it'd just be lightly brown.
Okay.
And there would always be some left. So after school, my after-school snack was the leftover biscuit bread from breakfast and red Kool-Aid. It had to be red. Didn't matter what the flavor, but it had to be red Kool-Aid to go with the biscuit. But that's the way he wanted it.
Well, now, we would take the biscuit and cut them open and toast them in the oven with butter on them and eat them with jelly or syrup. Well, we had cane syrup. Where they have molasses here, we had cane syrup in Alabama.
Now, my mother used to make syrup with brown sugar and lots of, I don't know how she made it exactly. It was really good. I do remember that. And she would make, I called them hoe cakes. They were, I guess, kind of like a crusty pancake that was a little bit smaller and thicker. And she would pour the brown syrup on them. They were delicious to die for.
Well, no, we would take the biscuit dough and fry it.
That's probably what she did. But it was really good. But now back to the quilts. The quilting part of the festival has always been one of the most popular parts that there have been. And people, they've come from far.
We've had people. I had a lady call me from several counties away this last week, and she wanted to know if we were going to have the festival, and I told her no, we would have it next year. And she was wanting to bring her quilt. She always brings some every year. But we've had a big variety of all kinds of quilts. A lot of people now do their piecing, and they get the quilt ready, and then they have someone else quilt it with those machines. But we have several ladies that comes that do all of their quilting by hand, the whole thing. Miss Bruner, Ella Bruner, we had Edith Kitts. She's passed away now, but she was one of the quilters that did that. And then we have some on display at the museum too, old quilts that people have donated.
Quilting is anymore pretty much a dying art, isn't it? With a lot of the younger generation.
Well, the old-fashioned quilting is, but we do have some of the younger people that are taking up the new type of quilting where they do the, like I said, they sew them on the machine, they applique them on the machine. We have some that are completely made on the machine, and some of them are beautiful. It's just a different thing, and they're not used like they used to be. At one time, like these, they were used to, and like people use blankets now, they use quilts for warmth in the winter.
Yeah, and it was a time in the olden days, and mainly you read about it in history, there were, when a family would move into a neighborhood, and maybe the pioneer days, there would be a house raising, there would be a barn raising, then there'd be a quilting bee. But now the quilting bees back then, they served a lot of purposes. They were social, they were get to know you and fellowship, and they were even a rite of passage in some cases, I guess, weren't they?
Well, and they would get together and then they would cook, and a lot of times they did canning that way too.
And you see on the Waltons, There was an episode of the Waltons, I'm sure you've seen it, where they were doing a quilting for Mary Ellen, and she was resentful of it because it was like they were trying to make a woman all over too early, and this was going to be her rite of passage into marriage, which was not what she wanted to do, and she resisted. But they are, I mean, even me, if somebody gave me a quilt, I'd just be thrilled to death. And I mean, to me, it's just, it would be more a historical treasure than anything.
It is. We've got several at the museum that are really, really old. Some of them are even actually coming apart because they're so old. And then we've got those that's the satiny, in velvet, the old ones that's displayed.
Well, now the ones that are so old, say 100, maybe 150 years old, that have been so well preserved, how probably did people go about preserving them so they lasted all this time?
Well, maybe they didn't use them. That's probably.
Could be part of it.
Because once you wash one, you've got a problem with them coming apart where they're put together, especially those that's hand-sewn. So you have to be really careful when you wash them. But this one's been washed, I know, several times. But that's what they would have to do. And then they'd store them in cedar chest. And
what about if I had a quilt? This is hypothetical, but let's say somebody gave me a quilt that's 150 years old, and it's in almost pristine shape, or as good as a 150-year-old quilt could be. What would be the best way for me to preserve it so that it could stay well preserved as long as possible?
Well, I wouldn't put it in any plastic containers, or the best thing I think is to put them in pillowcases or like that to protect them. But you don't want to put them in plastic, or you don't want them to get damp. Low humidity for them. But
does cedar have anything to do, like if I put them in a cedar chest, would that help preserve them more than any other kind of?
I'm not sure about that. I've seen quilts that were, I'm not an expert on that, but I have seen quilts that were in cedar chests that actually had some oxidation where they would
Really?
Turn brown and yellow spots on them.
I know they smell good. That's about,
Okay.
I guess that's the main thing cedar
They
would offer,
would.
would be that they smell good. And is this one, I know some quilts, they have different patterns. There's wedding ring and all this.
Yeah.
Does this particular pattern have a name?
This one is a fan quilt, and it's got 7 of these blades. Some of them has 9, but this one has 7. And it's made from, looks to me like it was made from maybe some old clothes and dresses and things, it looks like, from the material that's in it. Of course, this was different in the lining, but that's what it looks like. It was maybe clothes. And they usually have the red.
One thing that's interesting to me about quilts is I guarantee you a lot of the old-time ladies that quilted these, if you gave them a geometry textbook, they probably wouldn't make too good a grade in geometry. But now a well-made quilt is a geometric marvel, because every one of these pieces, now you tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that every one of the pieces of the span's the same exact size, almost probably to a millimeter, an eighth of an inch at least.
Well, the difference in this one and a lot of the quilts today, these were hand cut. These pieces were all cut with scissors, and today a lot of times they're cut with those cutters and either the roller things that they cut them with, or they're cut with, sometimes they have actually little machine things they cut them with, and they're more accurate. And a lot of the ones today, I guess, are more accurate than some of these were, but they did a good job on these. They all look very similar.
I know that even if I was trying to draw that on a piece of paper, by the way, they used to have the 4-H poster contest every year. I entered every year. Always got a participation ribbon that too. I'm no artist and I'm no cook, and I can talk a little bit. It's what I learned from 4-H.
Oh, well, I did speaking when I was in high school too.
Did you get a blue ribbon?
My voice would carry, they could hear me all the way across the auditorium without a microphone. We didn't have microphones then. But my problem was I always talk with my hands. That ruined my speech.
You notice how I'm holding my hands right now? That's to keep me from doing that right now. But I guarantee you that if I took paper, pencil, whatever, rulers, and tried to draw that pattern on a giant sheet of paper on the floor, I couldn't even do that.
Well, I'll tell you a little story about my great aunt Mamie that made this quilt. When she died, she was buried in a black bonnet. That was the thing. She died in the 70s, and her daughter had a bonnet made for her so she could use it when she passed away. And she always wore a bonnet, I guess, all of the time. But that was quite interesting that anybody in the 1970s would be buried in a black bonnet like they did many, many years ago.
And how old was she when she passed?
She was probably in her 80s. She was quite old because she was born before the turn of the century.
And you have something else in your lap.
Oh, well, this is an apron that my gram made. And when I was in the 5th grade, when we did the biscuit thing, our teacher had us make aprons. Every girl in the class made aprons. That had to do with the 4-H club too, but we made the paper whenever we did the biscuit contest, and then I also won the spelling bee in the county that year, so I was in the paper 2 times that year, in the big county paper. And it was interesting though that our teacher had us to make the aprons, and every girl in there made the aprons. But this one, my grandmother made it, and it's kind of a bright color. She always liked bright colors. But I don't remember my mother wearing an apron, but a lot of people did wear aprons. They had aprons, like she said, that they would wear for special occasions, and then some that they wore just to keep their dresses clean when they were cooking.
And aprons, I could not tell you. I can remember my step-grandmother. And I was born late in my parents' lives, so all my grandparents were dead except my maternal grandfather. And he was on his 4th wife. He lived to be in his 90s, and he outlived 3 wives. And my dad really wanted him to outlive number 4, but he didn't.
Oh, okay.
There's a story there, which we can't tell. But anyway, she always wore an apron. And I can remember my great Aunt Liddy, who was my dad's aunt. She always wore an apron. And her sisters did, but other than that, and the last one of them probably died maybe 20, 25 years ago. I could not tell you the last time I have seen an actual person, maybe other than works in a restaurant or somewhere, wear an apron just around the house to cook or to do anything.
I don't think they do anymore. People make some, like they do the quilts, just to be making aprons. And we wore them one year at the festival. We made bonnets and aprons and wore them as part of our costume for the festival.
And it's good that heritage is preserved, that people still, they're a throwback to the old days, they're decorative, they're costume or whatever. And quilts, that they're, the fact people still quilt in and of itself is a treasure. But it's really sad that society has moved along so fast now that everything's pre-manufactured and it's just use it up, wear it out, throw it away, buy something else.
Well, when I was younger and my kids were younger, we sewed clothes for the children. And we made dresses and later on pantsuits, and we sewed all kinds of things and lined jackets, and I actually made jeans for my boys one time because I didn't have girls, so I had to do boy clothes, shirts and jeans. But nowadays, nobody makes clothes. Very few people makes clothes at all. And everything that is done with sewing now, most everything is craft things, like the quilts and craft projects that people do.
I guess that's the main difference now. It's a craft people do because they want to, but it's not a necessity of life. See, back in the day when these were created, they were necessities of life. If you didn't make them, you didn't have them.
And one of my first sewing projects was when I was in the 5th grade too, and we had 4-H club. They had Barbie doll patterns that they gave us, and I made Barbie doll clothes for one of our friends' little girls, and she paid me for them. They were not the greatest sewing.
Now, my mother, she quilted, but she was not, mother was not a person that took a lot of intricate time to really, hers was necessity. You know, you needed a quilt to keep warm, so you threw together some old, I mean, they weren't decorative, they were very serviceable. But they didn't have patterns, they were just, you might have 7 big pieces of this and 3 little pieces of that. You had enough to cover a bed.
But they worked, huh?
They worked, and you didn't freeze in the winter, but these types of quilts, they're really prized by people, even today, for their intricacy and for their beauty and for their patterns.
Well, this is one of my favorite patterns there, but like you were talking a while ago, they're difficult to sew like this, to get these circles in like that, and to get them to lay down.
I can see how they would be. And I'm thankful for the people over the years that were able to do this, and I'm even thankful for the people that manufacture them now, because if it hadn't been for them, I'd have froze. I can't thread a needle and can't sew my own. So, is there anything else, Miss Ellen, you'd like to tell us about the wonderful world of crafting quilts and aprons, and about the Heritage Festival, or anything you'd like to tell us?
Well, I'm sorry that we can't have it this year, but hopefully we'll have it next year, and that we will have our quilters back, because like we said a while ago, that is one of the best things when we get those quilts hanging around the museum. And the museum is a perfect place for that, because they're safe in there, away from the weather, and we couldn't have them otherwise if we didn't have it at the museum.
Right.
And they're so colorful when we get them hung.
Oh, it is pretty in there
Yes.
when they're all decorated. I have faith that we will have the Heritage Festival again, as in days of old, in 2020. Let's see, had to skip it this year, 2020, but I bet 2021, I have faith we'll be back strong as ever.
Well, I certainly hope so, because it's really been a good thing for the county.
It has.
And
It's
we
brought in a lot
enjoyed
of
it.
people. Yes, yes, and it's brought in a lot of people from other areas,
And we do have a wonderful museum that we would like for people to come and visit, and they can see our artifacts and the quilts that we've got there. And we are open now.
Yes, and there are so many interesting things in there. Sunday was my day to watch it.
Oh, I saw you on the calendar.
Mine is the 5th Sunday, which only comes up like 4 times a year. And I'll tell a little something on myself. I did actually make it on time.
Okay.
And I opened, and as I was closing, I noticed I forgot to turn the sign around. So if anybody passed by all day long, it said closed. But my car was outside, so maybe they would have figured it out. But anyway.
You're not the first one to do that.
And probably it won't be the last time I'll do it. But I had the museum to myself. And when you've got it to yourself, you can browse around. One of the things in there that was most fascinating to me, didn't have anything to do with anything we're talking about, but Dotson Creek Church, when it closed down, one of their foot washing pans and some of the towels they used and their communion tray is on display in the museum. And you have to look for it. It's not just one thing about our museum is chock full of stuff.
We have a lot of artifacts.
Yes, and unfortunately not more room, but that's okay. Better to have too much to fill the space you've got than not enough. But every time I look at it and go through it, there's always something you've never seen from the other time. It's free admission, and it's right there, and it's open Sunday 1 to 5, Monday is at 10 to 5.
4. 10 to 4.
10 to 4, and Tuesday 10 to 4.
And we have a wonderful genealogy library for
Yes.
people that want to do research. And we've had people from everywhere come, all across the country. And that's one of my favorite things, next to quilts and sewing and painting pictures and things. I do enjoy working with the people that are doing genealogy.
Yes. That's one thing never grows old.
No.
I know myself that when I was younger and my aunts would tell all these old stories, they were nice and wonderful to hear, but I didn't worry much about them. But now, in my later years, they're gone. So once in a while, something will come up and I'll think, well, I'll ask so-and-so. No, I won't ask so-and-so.
No.
So-and-so's gone.
Unfortunately, that happens all the time. You're wanting to know something, and you said, you can't ask these people because they're no longer here with us.
True. And it's something we take for granted when we're young. Of course, when we're young, we think that we're probably going to live forever, even though we know we're not. But the older we get, the more we wonder about things from the past. And unfortunately, you have to dig and find the answers when you get older. But we do have, our museum is really good. A good place to, it's just a good place to go to spend. I mean, it's nice and it's quiet and it's peaceful. And people that come by, they're friendly, and we can't recommend it enough, can we?
No, I wish that we could have more hours and have more time to do it, but we don't have enough volunteers to do that.
And if any of you out there watching would like to volunteer to watch the museum, to keep it open, it's a pretty simple process. Miss Wanda Cox Byerly will train you in exactly what to do. Of course, she didn't turn me loose with a key for a year, but I've got my own key now.
Oh, well, that's good.
I know the burglar alarm
You know the
code
burglar
now.
alarm. Sometimes it doesn't work, does it? That's when I press the wrong button.
I'm afraid it'll work one day the way I don't want it to. I'll set it off. But Miss Ellen, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Well, I enjoyed it.
And if you would ever like to come back, we would be more than happy to have you come back, and we'll talk some more about some other good things.
Okay, that would be nice. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Ellen. Thank all of you for joining us for this segment of Uniquely Union. And we hope to see you at the Heritage Festival. Don't forget us. We're trying to keep the Heritage Festival alive in your memory. It won't be held this year, October 2020, but we hope to see you live in person in October 2021. I'm Ronnie Mincey, and thank you for joining us.